retrospect, our mistake was to leave the prosecution of Trump and his insurrectionist traitors to civilian authorities. We didn't do that when Pierre Beauregard opened fire on Fort Sumter in 1861, and we didn't do it when Confederate agents tried to set fire to the city of New York in 1864, and we didn't do it when John Wilkes Booth shot Lincoln in 1865, and for that matter, we didn't do it when John Brown tried to seize the arsenal at Harper's Ferry in 1858. And as much as it sounds like crazy QAnon fever dreams of military tribunals and summary executions and body doubles, it is unavoidably clear that President Biden should have sworn his public oath of office at noon on Tuesday, January 20th, 2021, said thank you, made his speech, and invoked the Insurrection Act, and detained Trump before he could leave Washington, and rounded up maybe a dozen leaders of the plot to overthrow the election and the government, and given the actual cowardice of the people like Trump and Bannon and Jeffrey Clark and Meadows and the others, and how easily they would have been subdued and placed in a stockade or a brig, the president would have then been able to have terminated the Insurrection Act within a couple of hours tops. I mean, this is what Trump is planning for January 20th, 2025. It is. It may not involve detaining President Biden or other prominent figures whose disappearance might trouble even our Supreme Religious Court, but the use of the Insurrection Act to quell not, insurrections, but peaceful protest, the use of the Insurrection Act to enable Trump to send tanks down Upper Wacker Drive to terrify Chicago or just terrify democracy, all of it to be set into motion the day he again seizes power. This is one of Trump's most well-publicized plans for his renaissance. I mean, like every other extra-constitutional thing he did, it kind of gets buried behind the coup attempt. But on June 1st, 2020, Trump came about as close to doing it as you could without doing it when he had National Guard troops, along with police officers of various stripes, shoot tear gas and rubber bullets and flashbangs at Black Lives Matter protesters in Lafayette Square outside the White House so he could get to a photo op. That was the Insurrection Act in action. In fact, in everything but name. Trump's lackeys were evoking, if not invoking, the act after they lost the election. We know that. Trump's lackeys are still dreaming of using it against civilians. This is not some last choice. Swallow hard. Prepare for years of atonement. Await the judgment of history, use of this weapon that we as a nation have just left there for the day when true crisis springs internally. The Insurrection Act is Donald Trump's wet dream. And God knows if he can do it, he will do it. So, certainly, detaining Trump on January 20th, 2021 would have been messy. It would have been extraordinary. It would have been shattering. On the other hand, so was the Civil War. On the other hand, so have the almost 3 years since January 6th been messy, extraordinary, and shattering. And 3 years after the Civil War shooting stopped, one of the leading pro-insurrection congressmen was running for the Democratic nomination for president. And that General Beauregard, who had fired on Sumter, was campaigning to build the Lincoln Memorial. And the Confederate Vice President Stevens had been elected to the U.S. Senate. And golly, when they rebelled against the duly elected government of the United States and attacked United States federal facilities, we didn't say, hey, they shouldn't do that. Let's arrest them. Trump tried to overthrow the government. His mob was armed. He did not send it into the Capitol with written orders because he didn't need to. He knew what he wanted. They knew what he wanted. They gave it to him. And I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to guess that just like me, you have always assumed that if you ever suddenly became insane and disloyal enough to try to break into and take over the Capitol of the United States during the certification of the Electoral College vote in order to break the 232-year history of the peaceful transfer of power and put the guy who lost the election in as president, you, like me, would have expected to be greeted by, machine guns. But the new president, bless him, thought this was fixable by less extreme means, and you cannot blame him for that. It reflects an optimism and a belief in all Americans that sadly has always been undeserved by some multi-digit percentage of all Americans. I always think of Lincoln's second inaugural address as one of the most poignant and saddest events in American history. With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations. Poignant, sad, heartbreaking, eternal, and naive. 41 days later, some of the people to whom he offered malice toward none and charity for all arranged to shoot and kill him. I mean, the Trump cult already expects they will be arrested, detained, disappeared. And it's not merely that they already expect Biden now or later to do something like invoke the Insurrection Act. They already blame him as if he already done it. On Saturday, the Pizzagate psycho Mike Cernovich posted on Twitter X that you have to buy a blue check mark from Elon Musk because, quote, X premium, it's the last stand before the Marxists genocide you and everyone you love. This was then reposted by Ashley St. Clair, the dead-eyed little operations director of the Babylon Bee, an online publication that mistakenly claims to be funny. She added, quote, I don't think many understand how serious this battle is. This is the last realistic shot we will have in our lifetime to preserve free speech and feed the system the most accurate version of humanity, unquote. And if you think that word salad didn't make any sense whatsoever, wait, there's more. Her reposting was replied to early Monday by Musk, who added greatly to the exchange of ideas, the marketplace of ideas, by writing, quote, yes, unquote. They really are throwing around terms like genocide. And more immediately, they are handing out signs at one of Trump's rallies over the weekend in Iowa, signs reading, quote, Biden attacks democracy. And while it is good news that Biden's argument that Trump is trying to impose authoritarianism is resonating so profoundly and disturbingly within Trump's diseased mind and clearly within internal Trumpian polling, that Trump has now resorted to his traditional tack of accusing the rightful accuser, it is still jarring to hear Trump say, quote, Joe Biden is not the defender of American democracy. Joe Biden is the destroyer of American democracy. This campaign is a righteous crusade to liberate our republic from Biden and the criminals and the Biden administration, unquote. And to say that without even a Trump crowd that has as much interest in preserving democracy as it has in eliminating fossil fuels, with that Trump crowd listening to that and not bursting into laughter. That's how paranoid they are. That's how lost they are. That's how much they expect to wind up in, I don't know, a real Twitter jail. Trump is turning the tables, a Trump advisor told the Washington Post. We are not going to allow Joe Biden and the Democrats to gaslight the American public, unquote. Now, we don't know which Trump advisor managed to say that without dissolving into laughter of his own, because according to the Post, the paper agreed to let whoever that was speak on the condition of anonymity because they weren't authorized to speak publicly, because a lot of journalists still can't help themselves. And they will gladly grant anonymous status to let Trump people lie on Trump's behalf about Trump in order to end the democracy and put everybody who works for the Washington Post in effing jail. Anyway, I have brought this whole matter of Biden invoking the Insurrection Act because the danger Trump has posed to this country openly since 2015, more realistically since 1989 when he defended the Chinese communists at Tiananmen Square, and he tried to get the Central Park Five executed even though they were innocent. That danger is now so extreme today that yesterday even the New York Times sat up and took notice. I know! The Times! Why a second Trump presidency may be more radical than his first. Donald Trump has long exhibited authoritarian impulses, but his policy operation is now more sophisticated, and the buffers to check him are weaker. No, seriously, on the front page! Near the other Times breaking news stories, Lindbergh lands at Paris. Napoleon defeated at Waterloo. I know! It's even in the Times! After only 34 years. Although, the story quickly dropped on the page to a position below an article about how Republican donors want Chris Christie to drop out and back Nikki Haley instead. Because we really need to know now, before any primaries, who's going to finish second in the last ever Republican primary race before our Hitler ascends to permanent power. Anyway, apparently, this Trump guy has been using violent and authoritarian rhetoric, Buffy, and there's growing alarm in comparisons to historical fascist dictators, and he's dehumanized his adversaries as vermin who must be rooted out. Why, he could mean people we know and like Ainsley and Spalding. And he said some of those nice immigrants who worked there at the club, they're poisoning the blood of our country. And Bronwyn says he also said something mean about that nice General Milley. You know, Lacey's granduncle's godfather's classmate at Princeton. Seriously, the New York Times devoted 2,497 words to, golly, the dangers of Trump. Written by, and I mean with bylines from, Charlie Savage, Jonathan Swan, and Maggie Haberman. And Savage is cool. He's always been real. But bluntly, Jonathan Swan and Maggie Haberman have spent the last 8 years treating Trump as if they didn't live here, or maybe as if he didn't live here. But whichever way, they've been treating him as if he'd never do any of that to them. My point is, even the Times. Same day the Liz Cheney book tour started. Same day the Atlantic devoted its entire issue to the Trump threat. The same day most of the nation became aware that Trump's Georgia lawyer basically told the court that if he's reelected, he'll find a way to postpone the trial until 2029. And a lot of us thought, yeah, right, only until 2029. The same day, Semaphore News pointed out that Megyn Kelly was dead in the media water 3 years ago. And then a bunch of ex-Glenn Beck lunatics threw a bunch of money at her and built her a studio and gave her a fascist video and podcast platform. And tomorrow she's going to co-moderate a Republican debate. And the promo for her doing that shows her sitting back to the camera, and then she spins around. I swear the first time I saw it, I thought it was a reboot of Tales from the Crypt. And all this, even though her podcasts and her shows don't make anybody but her any money, which underscores that there is an extraordinary right-wing media machine here churning out literally dozens and dozens of fascist and racist and authoritarian propaganda programs and networks and call-in shows and interviews and bullshit. While the liberal media consists of the Washington Post still letting Trump spokesman lie off the record, and Politico reporting that ABC News political director Rick Klein did a walkthrough at St. Anselm College in New Hampshire yesterday because ABC really wants to hold its own Republican debate before the primary next month. Wait, St. Anselm? Wasn't that where CNN let Trump end its credibility and destroy Caitlin Collins' career last spring? But thank God they have new management at CNN. And oh, by the way, in the same story, CNN is now trying to get GOP approval for its own debate. And the liberal media machine, that's ABC News doing Republican debate, CNN doing Republican debate, and Washington Post letting Trump spokesman speak off the record while lying. The liberal media machine still thinks it is anchored by MSNBC, which buried Mehdi Hasan, and the gutless Rachel Maddow still didn't say a damn thing about it on her show last night. I'm Rachel Maddow. And that Democratic mouthpiece, the New York Times, after just 34 years, finally let Cricket and Hubble and Bitsy in on the horrible truth about this man, Trump. Here ultimately is the point. I am delighted Judge Chutkan has written a searing 48-page rejection of Trump's belief in the divine right and absolute immunity of presidents, and that the D.C. Court of Appeals said the same thing in its rulings on the rights of congressmen and law enforcement officers to sue Trump over January 6th. And then I keep remembering, hey, Alito and Thomas and Roberts and Spalding Kavanaugh and Corky Gorsuch and Bronwyn Coney Barrett, I remember them, and somehow I just don't think any of this is going to survive the Supreme Court. And I'm not so certain that even any of the convictions would survive the Supreme Court. And worse yet, I'm not exactly certain that the people who Leonard Leo owns and the people who Harlan Crow owns aren't right now looking for ways to help Trump stall at the Supreme Court. Just because Thomas and Alito are going to hear a case today that could ban, before it was even enacted, any kind of wealth tax. See, there's one thing Trump and I agree on, and that is, Justice Department should have started this years ago. Should have started his prosecution on the afternoon of January 20th, 2021. I don't know if you can tell yet, but I am, for the first time, not really optimistic about November 5th, 2024. And so what I'm wondering now is this. We know Trump plans to end democracy. We know he has plans to ethnically cleanse the country. We know he has plans for concentration camps. We know he has plans for mass deportations. We know he has a plan for a complete purge of government employees to be replaced by those loyal only to him first and America last. We know he has plans for violating, if not trying to invalidate, parts of the Constitution like birthright citizenship. And we know he has plans for using the Department of Justice to put people he doesn't like in jail. Oh, and we know he has plans about that little issue of the military suppression of public protests, because we know he has a plan in place to invoke the Insurrection Act. And there's not a damn thing we can do about any of it. Well, there is one thing. Who can invoke the Insurrection Act? Which guy in the government is allowed to invoke it? What does it say? Who gets to decide that? The Insurrection Act, which we did not reform even after Trump threatened to use it against Black Lives Matter in the week after George Floyd was murdered. We didn't change it because we all just hoped everything would go back to normal once Trump lost and went away. Who has control of invoking the Insurrection Act? Oh, right. The president. Who's the president again? I mean, what would they do to Joe Biden if he invoked the Insurrection Act today? Impeach him? After yesterday, when James Comer and his echo chamber of 1,000 Jonathan Turleys, only each is dumber than the original Jonathan Turley, produced the smoking gun, Hunter Biden's illicit, corrupt, illegal, criminal, unconstitutional repayments to his dad for loan and lease payments on Hunter's Ford truck. $1,380 each. 3 payments of $1,380 each. $4,140. But the most corrupt $4,140 in human history. Trump gets up in a public place at least once a week and calls for rooting out vermin from America and deporting millions from America, putting them in camps, and sending scumbags into, well, inner cities to threaten voters. And he talks about terminating the Constitution, and he urges his thugs to kill a federal prosecutor and a federal judge and a state attorney general and 2 state judges and the judge's clerk and the judge's wife and the judge's son and Robert De Niro. And that's just this past week. You want to make a bigger case for invoking the Insurrection Act now and detaining Trump for trial by the military based on every public threat and every public incitement to revolution that he has made while not president? You want to do it chronologically or alphabetically? What do you think the odds are that you could read it aloud in less than 24 hours? I mean, it would take you 24 hours to read it aloud. It's not like he's guilty of trying to overthrow American democracy or anything. Today, yet, the Insurrection Act is going to be used against Americans by a president of the United States. We are approaching a time when this issue simplifies and clarifies itself into this. Do you want that act invoked by a madman who is mentally deteriorating, who is trying to institute an authoritarian state with him as absolute dictator? Or do you want that act invoked by a statesman who would use it to defend the Constitution and who, after its use, would advocate for congressional modification of it and any other act that the next Trump might try to use against America? Which would you like? Because I think now, since 2015, we have been overthinking this. We are near the point at which you and I have a powerful law in our hands. We hesitate to use it because, correctly, we don't think that's what America is supposed to be. Unfortunately, there is a madman running at us bearing a gun, a tiki torch he bought at a chain store, a machete, and a tank, and a couple of million armed people behind him. And as early as January 20th, 2025, that powerful law that you and I have right now in our hands, we might have to turn it over to him. Now, do we use the law against him to save the nation, or do we wait and give him the law and let him use it to kill us? Time's up. Correct answer is Lincoln suspended habeas corpus. Lincoln ignored Supreme Court rulings. Lincoln invented emergency powers. Lincoln curtailed the First Amendment. Lincoln emancipated the slaves without any precedent. Lincoln declared martial law in Maryland and put the mayor of Baltimore into Fort McHenry and Fort Monroe for 15 days. And he's considered our greatest president. And if you don't think we are near all of that, only the shooting hasn't started yet, ask Muffy what she read in the Times yesterday. I mean, what are they going to do? Impeach him? Also of interest here, Trump is still going nuts, nutsier, quickly. And it's so bad that he screwed up one of those lines I mentioned about Biden being anti-democracy. He screwed it up so badly that nobody actually has any idea what he meant to say. Also, he claimed Jimmy Carter was the first lady. That's next. This is Countdown.
This is Countdown with Keith Olbermann.
Postscripts to the news. Some headlines, some updates, some snark, some predictions. Dateline Capitol Hill, it's showtime. The White House Director of Management and Budget, Shalanda Young, has written to the Speaker, the House Minority Leader, the Senate Majority and Minority Leaders, and the message is simple. Quote, I want to be clear, without congressional action by the end of the year, we will run out of resources to procure more weapons and equipment for Ukraine and to provide equipment from U.S. military stocks, unquote. What amazes me about Republican opposition to backing Ukraine as it, to use an old Republican phrase, fights the Russians there so we don't have to fight them here, is not their pro-Russian stance, but the fact that the GOP is actually positioning itself as anti-gun. Dateline Atlanta, Kanye West's former publicist, Trump Georgia defendant Trevian Kutti, still has not been jailed, even though she threatened witness and Georgia election worker Ruby Freeman. On Instagram, according to Midas.com, she promised, there's a woman sitting somewhere who knows that I'm going to F her whole life up when this is done. Kutti also says she practiced her mugshot pose for 2 hours. If you have seen the photograph, you know she should have practiced it for 12 hours. Oh, Nancy! Can I get a witness? Can I frighten a witness? Can I intimidate a witness? Can I terrorize a witness? Thank you, Nancy Faust. Dateline 30 Rock, the online petition to get Mehdi Hasan reinstated, crossed the 15,000 signature plateau last night. Long piece in the Washington Post yesterday about MSNBC's silencing of Hasan and its rapid collapse into the simple, unquestioning reading aloud of press releases. If you want to sign this petition, it's standwithmehdi.com. That's standwith, MEHDI. I assume you know how to spell .com. Dateline Trumpland. He says Liz Cheney was wrong. Kevin McCarthy did not go to see him after he lost the election because he wasn't eating. It was because he was eating too much. Define too much. Too much for a human or too much for Trump? He also misspelled Kevin. He attacked Robert De Niro. He attacked Drudge for putting a picture up that's a silhouette of him wearing a crown. He attacked the college football playoff format. And that already damaged brain full of cheese whiz slid even further off the cracker.
And I have to tell you, Jimmy Carter, as you know, our First Lady went to the funeral of Rosalind Carter. It was a beautiful event, by the way, and everybody was very nice.
First Lady Jimmy Carter. Right you are, Dementia J. Trump. And then, of course, there was this.
We've been waging an all-out war in American democracy. You look at what they've been doing.
Now, what he said there, we've been waging an all-out war on American democracy, and what he meant to say there are both in dispute. Rather incredibly, Snopes.com first insisted Trump had not said we've been waging an all-out war on American democracy, but rather that he'd said we've been waging an all-out war in American democracy, which, you know, I guess, I mean, he has brain damage. Anything's possible. But what would that mean? Then, having taken a lot of abuse for this, Snopes.com then revised its finding and insisted that whatever he actually said, he meant they've been waging an all-out war. And thus, Snopes is sticking by its claim that Trump, who has waged an all-out war on American democracy, did not mean to say we've been waging an all-out war on American democracy. Idiots. Still ahead of us on Countdown, for some reason today I am reminded of the movie A Christmas Story, in which little Ralphie finally figures out how to destroy the bully. Invoke the Insurrection Act. No, but invoked the clenched fist of insurrection acts. Next in Things I Promised Not to Tell. First time for the daily roundup of the miscreants, morons, and Dunning-Kruger effect specimens who constitute today's worst persons in the world. The bronze, worse, the organizers and participants of COP28, the climate change equivalent of the world's firefighters, holding a convention to decide whether or not they should try to stop fires. Who would have thought that having an oil executive from the United Arab Emirates who is a sultan as president of this year's summit might have proved unproductive? Quote, I accepted to come to this meeting to have a sober and mature conversation. I'm not in any way signing up to any discussion that is alarmist, said Sultan Al-Jaber, to suggestions that, you got to phase out fossil fuels or we all die. There's no science out there or no scenario out there that says that the phase out of fossil fuel is what's going to achieve 1.5 degrees. Please help me, show me the roadmap for a phase out of fossil fuel that will allow for sustainable socioeconomic development unless you want to take the world back into caves. Better caves than all of us are dead, Sultan. This idiot Al-Jaber's response to the ensuing controversy, he denied he said it. They played him the video of him saying it. He then said he'd always followed the science, and he accused the media of just taking one statement out of context. Yeah, I hear you. Out of context, pal. You implied just once that we have to keep using fossil fuels so you personally can make more money, and then all of us die. You say that once, and people think you might mean it. What kind of world are we living in? Runners-up, worser, Public Square, the online shopping site backed by Moron Jr. and Kimberly Guilfoyle and Kelly Loeffler and Blake Masters? Remember Kelly Loeffler? Politico reports they are selling the usual family items to the MAGA crowd. Christmas present wrapping paper, boxes to keep your guns in, and of course, Every Life brand diapers. A Trump MAGA website selling conservative diapers. Sometimes the jokes are so obvious, you don't even have to say them aloud. Telepathy, man. But the winner, the worst, Christian Ziegler, still not charged, still insisting he will not resign as chairman of the Florida Republican Party, even as details from the police report come out. He and the Mrs., co-founder of Moms for Liberty, chairwoman of the Sarasota County School Board, arch-conservative Bridget Ziegler, Bible thumper, they were seeing a woman on the side, and they were setting up the October three-way over at her house, as one does, when Bridget decided she wasn't into it that day. So the other woman canceled too, and she says Christian Ziegler went over to her house anyway and raped her and confirmed to police that he videotaped it, although he says, everybody say it with me now, the sex was consensual. Texts among the parties came out, and the alleged victim turns out to have canceled on Christian Ziegler by writing to him, quote, sorry, I was mostly in for her. Well, Bridget Ziegler is a member of the Central Florida Tourism Oversight District. She's supposed to make people feel welcomed in Florida. Christian Ziegler. I wonder if they're going to kick him out of that Bible class he teaches. Today's worst person in the world. To the number one story on the countdown, and my favorite subject, me and things I promised not to tell. As a preface, let me just be clear about this. I was never a bully as a kid. I mention this in the context of this question. Have you ever watched a movie and there's a scene in it and you go all pale because it really happened to you? Have you seen A Christmas Story? The movie TBS runs all day, every Christmas, little Ralphie and the Red Ryder BB gun, and you'll shoot your eye out. The scene where Ralphie completely loses it and takes down the bully and bloodies him, swearing a blue streak. Yeah, that was me. When I was a kid, in Hastings-on-Hudson, New York, I was considered above average in intelligence. Clearly, I have disproved this nearly every day of my adult life, but they didn't know that then. The main results of this assessment were I was moved into a class with kids a year older than me, sometimes 2 years, and I was still bigger than they were, and I had no patience. If I was talking and they were not paying attention, I got shovey. Like today. Like I said, I was never a bully. I just had a Bugs Bunny concept of violence. So my folks had me talk to a psychologist, and I quickly caught on, and I stopped shoving or hitting or pushing or anything. In fact, the advice was too good. The doctor turned me into a little New Yorker Gandhi. When the day came in the 4th grade, as it does for all kids at some point, that somebody else shoved me, I did nothing. I had been taught by the doctor, no shoving, Keith. This quickly deteriorated into the inevitable situation in which I got bullied. This went on for most of a school year, and no matter what my folks said, no matter how frustrated I got, I would not hit back. But this was also the same year that I became a baseball fan and a baseball card collector. And as the 4th grade ended, literally the next to last day of class, some kid sold me his entire baseball card collection, maybe 1,000 cards. Maybe it cost me $2. They were in a big paper shopping bag, and after a trip to the bathroom, I returned to my desk to discover that the bag had been stolen. As this penultimate school day ended and we all filed out of the classroom down several flights of stairs to the building exit which opened onto the flat, beautiful tar macadam playground, my main antagonist, the lead bully, the Scut Farkas of my 4th grade, shouted up from maybe 6 or 7 steps below me on the stairs. "Hey, Keith, what do you think of my baseball card collection?" He then held the bag of my cards aloft. Suddenly, my own rage and my opportunity merged into one shining moment. The bully was now on the ground floor landing of the school, moving towards the door that opened onto the playground. But I was still on the stairs, 6 or 7 steps up, and it dawned upon me that now those stairs made me at least 2 feet taller than this guy was, and that gravity had become my accomplice. I literally threw myself forward off the stairs. I landed on him, my knees connecting with his chest. The force of my leap pushed us both through the open door. We hit the playground with a thud, him on his back, me on his chest with my knees and the full weight of my body pinning down his elbows and upper arms. The most he could do was slap at me without aim or force. This is basically the visual of the Ralphie beats up the bully scene in A Christmas Story, only there was no snow because it was June. And I went to town. All that nice pacifist deprogramming went out the window. The bully had stolen my baseball cards. I punched him repeatedly, even as a serene clarity overtook me. I was displeased, but I was not blind with anger. As I was contemplating this, suddenly I felt the large hands under my arms of the gym teacher, Mr. Hood. Mr. Hood lifted me off the bully and said something, and I said, matter-of-factly, "Why did you do that? I'm not finished yet." I shook him off, and to my surprise, he fell into some low hedges. I turned back to the bully, who was still supine on the beautiful, freshly resurfaced playground. I assumed the same posture I had before, but instead of hitting him, now I simply grabbed his head and began to lift it up and then pound it down. Lift it up and then pound it down. Lift it up and then pound it down. I became aware at this point that the entire 4th grade had formed a gasping semicircle around us, and now I thought of them. I'm a giver. He bullied them, too, boys and girls alike. And we had, as I figured out at that moment, 8 years and 1 day left of school to deal with this bully. It would be easiest, I concluded, that if I ended his bullying right there. So I kept pounding his head into the tar macadam surface, so he'd never forget. Or maybe forget a lot. And then I felt 4 large hands under my arms. Mr. Hood had finally disentangled himself from the shrubbery, and my mother had appeared somehow, just as in the movie. They were finally able to overpower me. Since my folks had spent the year trying to get me to do what I had just done, they were cool with all this. I believe we went to get some ice cream. Somehow I didn't even get punished for pushing the gym teacher, Mr. Hood. So now that I think about it, from that day on, Mr. Hood always looked warily at me. And then he transferred to another school. The next day, the last day of fourth grade, I walked into my classroom, Mrs. Wolf's class, really not thinking about the previous day's dry run for a movie scene. All the boys in the class were huddled in a far corner of the room, whispering. After I sat at my desk, the one who had collaborated the least with the bully and his toadies, Tom Charlap, came over and said, Keith, I thought you might like these. And he handed me a stack of baseball cards. I was very moved. I said, thank you, Tom. And soon, to my bewilderment, every one of the other boys brought me tribute. Baseball card tribute. Some of the cards were still unopened in the packs and had clearly been obtained that morning at a local candy store. Of course, I had now been removed from some kind of cosmic precursor to the film A Christmas Story, and I had instead been placed in some kind of cosmic precursor to the film The Godfather, the scene of his daughter's wedding. Needless to say, there was no more bullying. Although, as always, there's a postscript. I left that school after the 7th grade, but 20 years after that class of kids graduated, a girl I had stayed friendly with, she was with me in college, invited me to what was their and kinda my reunion, and it was transcendent. I also made the 30th anniversary, and in 2010, Saturday, October 23rd, 2010, 12 years ago yesterday, I went to the 35th anniversary. It was held in, of all places, a restaurant in my hometown across the street from a 2-story building once owned by my dad, where my grandmother and grandfather once lived. It was a Saturday night in October. It was frosty, misty, the first night that truly hinted at the inevitability of winter, and I was half an hour early. And I sat there on a bench between the restaurant and the municipal parking lot, and my whole youth replayed itself in front of my eyes. Some sadness, mostly happiness, mostly eager anticipation of seeing these friends of my youngest youth once more. And then out of the distance, his familiar, skinny form, irregularly illuminated by the streetlights, walking towards me out of the fog, was the bully. Keith! Big hug. You really made it! Some small talk, all of it warm, completely in keeping with the O. Henry quality of the fog and the chill in the air and the reunion. And then he said, hey, you know what? I told my mother that you were going to be here supposedly tonight, and she said, son, maybe you shouldn't go. And I said, why not, Ma? And she said, well, you and Keith had some problems when you were kids, 4th or 5th grade. And I said I had no idea what she was talking about. Did we have problems? Did we have a fight or something? Time stood still. What do you say to him? It felt like I considered the options for several minutes. In reality, it was just a few seconds of hesitation, if that long. It dawned on me. I won that battle in 1967. This was now 2010. There was no reason to relitigate this. If he was faking not remembering it, I should go along with him and also fake not remembering it. If he really didn't remember, it was possible that this was because I kept pounding his head against the playground surface in June 1967. Oh, I'm sure we had a fight, I said finally. I mean, every kid in that class had a fight. I mean, in the 4th grade, I fought Brian Rubin one day, and then I fought with him against Gordon Craig and Ricky Wester the next day. So what? He smiled. I smiled. Another figure emerged from a newly parked car. Hey, look, it's Katzenstein. Let's go inside. I'll buy both you guys a drink. We had a great time. I never brought up the fight. But truth be told, it did take all of my self-control to not ask one question of everybody I saw. And that one question would have been, hey, anybody know whatever happened to that gym teacher, Mr. Hood? I've done all the damage I can do here. Thank you for listening. If you know others who are not yet listening, advise them. Tell the others. Countdown has come to you from the Vin Scully studios at the Olbermann Broadcasting Empire in New York. I mean, it's just a coincidence that I told the story today about beating up the bully. Countdown musical directors Brian Ray and John Philip Chanel arranged, produced, and performed most of our music. Mr. Chanel handled the orchestration and the keyboards. Mr. Ray was on the guitars, the bass, and the drums. Produced by TKO Brothers. I will not reveal the name of the bully. It was some conversation, though. No! All kids have fights. And in this one, I left you completely... Well, on the other hand, it was the last fight I ever started. Other music, including some of the Beethoven compositions, were arranged and performed by No Horns Allowed, the sports music courtesy of ESPN Inc., and it was written by Mitch Warren Davis, and we call it the Olbermann theme from ESPN2. What do you think of this new way of closing the show in which I just sort of riff on what we've already talked about? I mean, there must be a reason we decided not to alter the Insurrection Act. And if there's any man who means insurrection, it's Donald Trump. And if you're going to see it used on offense against us or in defense by us, I don't think there's any choice here. Our satirical and pithy musical comments are by Nancy Faust, the best baseball stadium organist ever. Our announcer today was my friend Richard Lewis. Everything else was pretty much my fault. That's Countdown for this, the 1,064th day since Dementia J. Trump's first attempted coup against the democratically elected government of the United States. Convict him now, or use the Insurrection Act against him now, while we still can. The next scheduled countdown is tomorrow. Bulletins as the news warrants. Till then, I'm Keith Olbermann. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, good Insurrection Act, and good luck. Can I get a witness? Can I frighten a witness? Can I intimidate a witness? Can I terrorize a witness? Thank you, Nancy Faust.